All right. I'm recording here with Bill Fowler. So Bill and I met through GLAR. So Greater Louisville Association of Realtors. So Jerry LeGrand was who connected us. We had a great dinner and we got to meet. And since then, things have changed for Simba. So can get into that side of it and how you're helping startups. But one thing I noticed when I kind of vetted, is this somebody you want to work with? Everybody loves Bill, and so I'm going to dive into that piece as well. And that comes from years and years in the experience, and a lot of, you like to put it, a lot of drinks that you buy people. You take them out, you build good relationships. So I want to dig into that part of the industry. But really the goal of this podcast is to take some of the wisdom that you've accumulated over the years and distill it down and give it to founders like myself to learn from. But also there's this dynamic in the space of founders have a hard time cracking in, and MLSs, don't necessarily make that a lot easier. And so how can we help founders and MLSs come closer together and have maybe a different conversation? I think a lot of conversations in this space are around, the data and MLSs and the whole network around the country. There's not much of a conversation about how founders can get access to that data or crack into the industry and kind of pitfalls that they run into. So that's why these conversations are happening. But all of that to tee up Bill, who I've been working with and have had a great experience with. Let's hear some of his wisdom. So Bill, thanks for coming on.
And an honor to be here, man. Yeah, our journey has been interesting, and to get to this point where you're doing things like this, and you're trying to help other people out is pretty remarkable. You've had a quite a ride, man. In what 8-9 months that I've known you. So happy to be here.
For sure, it's been a wild roller coaster. It's very hard to be a prop tech founder. I've been in several startups, and there's a lot to learn. I was an outsider. I would not have had the accelerated learning experience I've had without you. So let's dive into some of those things. But before, I think we need to set the groundworks about where you've come from. What's your experience? So as I said in the intro there, everybody knows you. So walk through why everybody knows you, what your roles have been, and I'll dive into each of those kind of individually.
Yeah, well, this is my 23rd year in the business, and in the real estate technology business, which when I started, there was really no such thing as real estate technology. I mean, I don't want to make myself sound too old, but 1999, 2000, somewhere in there when I left school, and I was an ad major, and the internet was really just becoming a thing for everybody, from MySpace, and being able to order a pizza on your computer was really, the biggest thing going at the time. And real estate hadn't really had been a pen and paper environment for generations. Cell phones were really not a thing either, and communication was really done through pen and paper, and it's funny, still is in a lot of ways in the industry. But I started as doing marketing work for my brother's company, which was an MLS software provider, boutique level software here in Huntsville, Alabama, and we were bootstrapping ourselves and just out there chasing, relationships just like you are. And what you realize is, you can buy a banner ad, or you can go to an AR event and you can do a trade show booth and you can have t-shirts and all that stuff. But really, what really matters is developing personal relationships with people, because as I think I've told you a few times, it really doesn't come down to product. I mean, the product is kind of an assumed box that you've checked at some point. What it really comes down to is that the person that's sitting across from you as you're doing a demo is not really grading what button does what, when, and how. They're grading you, how you interact with them, because they're taking a big chance on you. These folks have membership and boards of directors that hold their jobs in their hands, and so just in your case, Simba has created really positive relationships, and you have a lot of positive energy and momentum out there that doesn't have a whole lot to do with your product, frankly. So that's something I learned very early on, is being genuine, not trying to sell people, because as you know, people can smell a deal coming. They can feel a pitch coming a mile away. And what you really want to do is create friendships. And that's how you've gotten the deals that you've gotten. That's how I've gotten the deals that I've gotten. That's why I've had 23 years in this industry and have been relatively successful, is by creating friendships.
Yeah. And so after the MLS that you started with your brother, you moved on
Yeah.
to Compass and then Zillow. Walk us through that journey, and then I want to dig into each of those experiences and what you learned from them.
Yeah, well, after 12 years of working with my brother, if you've ever worked with family, I make this joke that one of us was going to get killed. Like we had reached a point where, we love each other and love each other still, but there was just a moment when I think I needed to graduate onto something different. And I had grown my own personal brand to a point where it was time. I felt like had been an assistant coach for long enough. And so Zillow called. And I had Steve Allen was my buddy at Zillow at the time, and this was at a point when Zillow was maturing in its own way into having to have more direct relationships with MLSs. And again, after 12 years of building relationships on the MLS side, I had quite a network of people that knew and trusted me. So I went to work for Zillow, a company that was not known and not trusted, and they used me and my network of relationships to kind of do some things they needed to do at the MLS level. And that was 3.5, almost 4 years there. I loved that time, and I still, some of my best friends are still there, and that was quite a ride then. And then I left Zillow because I got an outreach from Compass, another up-and-coming brand that I really felt was a challenge. I'd never worked on the broker side. I really loved what Compass set out to do, which was create one platform and really support the best of the best agents. I'm still, dedicated to that, as you are. And then that was 3.5, almost 4 years again. And then at the end of 2021, it was time to do something else, and went out on my own to do consulting work. And that's shortly thereafter I met you, but I really just kind of put myself out there to say, I've been doing this for a long time and I have these relationships, and I wanted to help young companies enter the industry at a time when I think a lot of VC money was floating around and there was a lot of excitement around new technology in real estate.
Yeah. And at your time at Zillow, you mentioned it there, you were helping instill a sense of trust and build those relationships. Zillow is kind of a unique player in the space. You mentioned it, there was not necessarily a sense of trust. They kind of barged their way in there and maybe had some sour taste in the mouth of brokers and MLSs and associations across the country. What was that dynamic from your perspective that you wanted to go in and help them alleviate? What was the mistrust there, and what were they doing that maybe needed some help from you?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was motivated largely by the fact that Zillow was this disruptor. And, back then that was a term that wasn't quite as tried as it is now. Zillow was doing new things. And as you have experienced, and a lot of your listeners and / viewers will probably have experienced too, is real estate technology. This is not an area of the world that's known for its innovation. These are people who are resistant to change. And Zillow was doing things, at least, that were pushing the envelope. And at the time, I felt like that the negative press they were getting was largely because they were changing things, and that they represented a challenge to your rank and file real estate agent. And I will still say, I don't think necessarily a challenge to the rank and file real estate agent is necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of complacency in the industry, and I think Zillow was challenging that complacency and the status quo, and I loved that idea. I still love that idea. It just turns out, as my relationship at Zillow grew, I was being asked to do a lot of things that maybe in the early days I could swear on a stack of Bibles and say Zillow will never be a broker. Zillow will never challenge the agent because the agent was, part of their ad revenue model. It became later in my tenure there, it became fairly evident that those maybe set in stone tenets that Zillow had sworn to were not quite as etched in stone as maybe they had been previous. And I felt like that I couldn't really do that for very much longer and maintain my own integrity. Yeah.
And where would you say Zillow's position in the space is now? When you look at what they've built, they've had a lot of experiments. Still, the majority of their revenue is coming from agents and advertising. They're really trying to diversify and grow their Zillow Flex program. They tried iBuying. When you look at Zillow today and you've seen it evolve over the years, how would you describe what they do, and what's their place in the industry as the future evolves?
Man, it's such a great question, and I think Wall Street's still trying to figure that out. I mean, they're obviously a very strong company. They have billions of dollars to mess around with. even though the industry likes to look at iBuying and point and laugh, although that was a failure for them, that was a failure they could afford to make. It wasn't like they went out of business overnight. It was a blip in the road for them. They still have ridiculous numbers. They still own the consumer. So no matter what they try and fail to do, even though they're trying to figure out what they're going to be next in the next stages, when you own the consumer engagement, you have quite an advantage. So I think they're still trying to figure out how to be a multiple $billion company. But again, that's their ace in the hole. They can't fail, really, as long as they have 200 and something million unique visitors every month.
Yeah, it's almost at this point like a Google when it comes to the search race. Google just has that mind share of when I need to find something on the internet, I go to Google, and I think Zillow has that effect within the real estate spaces, top of funnel, the portal.
Totally. It's a beautiful site. They give the consumer what they want. Now, okay, they haven't really figured out what their number one channel is going to be in terms of revenue long term. It doesn't really matter. Rich Barton is not a dumb guy. They'll figure this. I think they have figured out a lot of what they need to be successful long term, obviously. But it's that hockey stick movement or that tip to tail kind of experience that they're still trying to find. With their acquisitions, you can see what they're kind of up to, but they're not quite there yet. But again, I wouldn't bet against them either.
For sure. And I think if I were to summarize from a consumer's perspective what they did so well, it's they consumerized and built like an e-commerce experience where people go in there and look at homes whether they're looking for one or not. It's almost become a cultural thing to go look at homes and just dream on Zillow. That's kind of what they created. Now at Compass, what did you learn while you were at Compass? What was the takeaway from Compass, and what were they doing well?
Yeah, Compass, and again, to reiterate, I think the Compass mentality is very strong. Whether or not Compass can execute on that long term, again, is up in the air based on their stock price and based on the news that we're seeing right now around the company. But I think that the idea that you need to bet on the best in the business is not a bad one. Compass went out and bought a lot of brokerages, a lot of boutique, high-end luxury brands in the largest markets, which was the right thing to do. Where they took a misstep, I think, is they gave all their profits away to these people. So when you hire the best of the best, it's kind of like trying to be the Lakers. When you go out and spend over the salary cap to get 5 of the best players, how do you make any money? All your money is going to the people who are on the court. And so therefore it became very difficult for them to make ends meet when they're burning through hundreds of millions of dollars a year. I mean, it's easy to burn through hundreds of millions of dollars of someone else's money, but at some point you got to turn a profit. And I think that became very elusive. It's not very easy to make business as a broker, as anybody who's listening as a broker will attest to. You got to find ancillary products and so forth. And so anyway, what I learned that you can run fast and make a lot of enemies in the process. Compass bought a lot of their success, and then skirting the boundaries of the rules in some markets. Coming soon was a policy I still believe was written specifically targeting Compass. NAR did their best to kneecap that process. We're still dealing with that today. So a lot of factors have played against Compass's business model, but I still believe in what they were founded on, which is betting on the best and brightest agents and giving them the tools they need to do business every day.
Yeah. And last question before we get into kind of the meat of this episode with kind of deep dive into MLSs and young prop tech companies. Do you believe that a brokerage can be treated and call themselves a tech company? Because I think that's one thing that was a disconnect with Compass was they got a tech company valuation, I think, as they were raising venture capital. And, of course they had, the major funds across the world investing. They had all this capital, billions of dollars raised, and they IPO'd, and now their stock price is not reflecting the same valuations of a tech company. And I look at the space as a tech founder, someone that's built, software products. Brokerages just don't have the business models to call themselves, from a unit economics perspective, a tech company. But what are your opinions on this? Can a brokerage call themselves a tech company? Maybe there's different types of brokerages. There's traditional brokerages. And where do you think Compass fell into that?
Yeah, well, to call themselves a tech company, like that was predicated on Compass building a platform. This term the platform, which Robert Reffkin, mentioned at several different conferences on the stage, was a tip-to-tail experience for the agent. Right now, the real estate agent, as you know, has a dozen logins to do what they need to do every day, and the KW model was, we're going to license all this software, the best software, we're going to put it all in one package, and we're going to pay for it all. It's going to be a benefit of being a KW agent. Well, Compass took that whole thing and said, we're going to, instead of licensing all this software and make it part of our overhead to be like, to have a dozen logins, we're going to build one thing, which is bold and expensive and takes a lot of time. So through M&A and through in-house development, Compass tried to build the one platform. It took twice as long as they thought it was going to. They called themselves a tech company. They hired out of technology. I mean, they had a CTO, they had a VP of product, they pulled people from Amazon, from Tesla, from Twitter. And ultimately, it's a very difficult business to do that in, turns out. Especially when your end user is not a technologist.
Yeah.
When your end user is resistant to technology and you're asking them to do certain things, jump through certain hoops that you as a 30-something-year-old CEO, it's second nature to you. You're asking basically people who are your parents' age to embrace the technology you're providing them. And there's friction there. I mean, that's only one place where there's friction, but that was a high amount of friction within the walls of Compass, was trying to get adoption within your own agent community. Very
Is there a
difficult.
brokerage that you look at today and say they're doing technology right? That you think they've got the best play on technology?
No, I don't. And there probably are out there, and there are probably boutique, brokerages that have 50 or less agents that all are, reasonably in tune with whatever the modern 2023 versions of these platforms might look like. But as far as a national brokerage, I just can't. EXP would be, the most obvious choice. But I don't know how you maintain, 5 figures worth of agents in your ranks and call yourself a technology company. It's impossible.
Yeah. I would have said an EXP too. From what I've seen, I've got friends that are EXP agents. They've got a good stack that is easy to access, and they've got a lot of tools there. But they license their technology too, so can't necessarily call themselves a technology company. To get into the meat of this, you've been in the space, especially on the MLS side, for a long time. What surprises you the most that, from your opinion, is either changing or hasn't changed on the MLS side of things?
Well, I'm gonna say that has changed, and I think it's been a relatively recent development. And in my time in talking to, advising, selling to, buying drinks for MLS executives, I think that there's a wake up. We're seeing an awakening among the top 20 to 30 MLSs in the country. These would be MLSs that are above 10,000 members or so. We're talking about brokerages as technology companies. I think MLSs are realizing that they are playing a role as a technology company to their members. Whereas, the traditional government structure and pace of an MLS organization is you're run like a nonprofit. There's lots of money in the bank, and you make a ton of money based on, your membership fees and so forth. But it's just, they are just run at a pace that is more akin to the American Red Cross than Microsoft. And I think most MLSs now are realizing that they are, in effect, to their rank and file membership, that they are a technology company, and are beginning to turn into that. They're beginning to change the way they do business and to change their structure to accommodate that, which is an astounding thing to say, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah. And then let's dive into a few of those things. In order to treat themselves like a business, I've got a list of some things that I think they need to improve on to function more like technology companies that support these early stage startups. Even the big ones, the brokerages, need these MLSs to function more like technology companies as well. Let's go through some of these. So number one is, this kind of maybe is all encompassing, but collaborating with technology. And I'm going through this, in order to work with an MLS, there's a lot of things a tech company needs to do, especially get buy-in from brokers, integrate with the technology, have the right developers on staff that know how to develop the types of integrations that these MLSs require. How can MLSs better collaborate with technology? What is like the main thing that you see?
Well, I think the driver of this is revenue. So if we take a step back and this is not going to be a secret to anybody who's listening, it may be surprising to them, but as you know, that in any MLS roster, there's 30 to 40% of their membership that are not actively doing business. So if you can imagine that we've been in this kind of generational market over the past 2 to 3 years, where business has been falling out of the sky and MLSs are, awash in revenue, and everybody's, there's more to agents than there ever has been. There's still a certain percentage of your membership that actually isn't even doing any business, hasn't had a transaction in a number of months. So there's that risk. I mean, there's that. Every MLS is aware of this. It's not really something that they talk a lot about, but there is that risk. And so they're this new attitude, or relatively new attitude towards technology, you included, is that if we are looking to a downturn in the market or some sort of soft recession, and the market goes sluggish, that you may begin to lose some of these people who are on the fringes of doing business or not, and so they're looking for rev share. So their implementation attitude now is they're not going to entertain you unless there's some sort of kickback to them. There's some sort of rev share to them, which is a completely different mindset than there has been over the last 25 years in how MLSs interact with technology. Is they've rented their technology. So there's been a price per user per month because the money's always been there. So they're going to say, okay, Simba, we'll pay you, 80 cents a user a month, and then you're a member benefit. That attitude still is, holding true on some kind of platforms, but for the most part, young companies that want to knock on an MLS door need to come equipped with a rev share. That's the data share is a given. The relationship is fine, but they're going to put you on a store shelf someplace, and that's going to be the relationship that you have with them.
Yeah. We're just launching 2 of those partnerships that are rev splits, and it's very clear that it aligns incentives, and it gives the opportunity for them to make more revenue, which makes them want to deepen that partnership with us. And so we've got to be creative and figure out how to go to market and distribute the product through them with their help, and support them and their members. So I think that definitely seems to be the model where all incentives align. On the data side, here's another one of those list items here on MLS's functioning more like tech companies. How has that evolved over time, specifically with the APIs and the ability for companies to just have standardized data, normal web APIs? How have you seen that evolve over the years, and where do MLSs need to be in the next 5-10 years with that?
Well, this conversation begins and ends with RISO. RISO comes along some years ago. It was actually a plant by NAR. It was my very first RISO conference was in Chicago in the NAR building because it was a project of NAR. Some years later, it didn't take long for organizers to realize that in order to be truly effective, you had to be independent of the NAR logo. And so RISO splits off and develops this data dictionary. For those who don't know, RISO, their mandate, which was colossal at the time, was establishing a Rosetta Stone for real estate data. Bedrooms in Miami were not the same as bedrooms in Fort Lauderdale. The relationship between MLS data was so disjointed that you couldn't do business across market lines because the data was completely different. It's still different, but it's not quite as different as it used to be. So RISO comes along and establishes, these standards around data, and the reason why they did this is so companies like you could create national synergies. So you could provide solutions for agents from, coast to coast, which, again, for people who are not initiated into dealing with real estate data sounds ridiculous, but this is a very new development. Within the last 5 years, the data dictionary has really become a thing. And so to answer your question about what the relationship with MLSs and young technology regarding data is, it was made incredibly much more simpler because of RISO, but we're not done yet. Clearly we're not done yet because you're still dealing with these speed bumps, and some of them aren't accidents. So when you're dealing with MLSs, some of them create these boundaries, and this is going to be a controversial statement, on purpose, so that the MLS that they can't stand across the river, that they don't compete with each other. There's a lot of territorialism in these MLSs that maybe aren't apparent to an objective viewer. So we still do have a ways to go before we have some homogeneous data arrangement where we can just dive into a big bucket and make a product that services every agent in the country. But we may never get there, actually. But RESO's taken us a long way to that point.
Yeah. And when I'm talking to VCs that don't really maybe understand the space very well, or I'm speaking with friends that I'm educating on the space and I know they have a technology background, one of the first places I go, because it's just so fascinating to me, is that data, is the fact it's so fragmented. All of these different MLSs across the country and within the MLS network have different technologies, different structures of their data. And that's just a really fascinating problem that needs to be solved, because I come directly just from the software space. I'm an outsider. My co-founder is a realtor, so he understands a lot better. But from my perspective, as somebody that's been in software, take Simba, for example. We use APIs like Stripe and Plaid. And if you look at how well they've been able to aggregate data and standardize it and open it up to developers via APIs, it's expanded the amount of technology innovation in the banking and fintech space. And then when you look at something as large as the real estate industry, which is the largest industry in the world, it's the most, net worth of value on the planet, and they still have this issue. It's a really fascinating issue to study and become passionate about, because there's so much kind of unlocked potential there. So I love talking about that. And the RESO conferences I've been to one. I'm looking forward to the next one. But it's fun. Like, it's really kind of a nerdy, laid back, very casual conference. And I love that. And these conversations are important. So yeah, it's just a fascinating issue. On the next point here, actually I had this one submitted to me by a fellow listener and a fan. How can MLSs be more modular? So I guess what this is referring to is MLSs, there's a lot that can be done with the data, around listings, around marketing, around visualization. And to date, it seems like a lot of MLSs have tried to handle this in-house, or the MLS platforms, rather. The technology providers are trying to do all of these things. How can it be more modular? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, it's a good one. And I think we're moving in that direction. And the reason why we're not at that place right now is because the data feeds that are released by MLSs. So again, for those uninitiated who haven't experienced this before, is if you knock on the door of an MLS and you ask for a data feed, seems straightforward enough. But the controversial thing is that MLSs issue data feeds based on use. So they're going to ask you what you're going to do with it. And it's kind of like if you will go to Home Depot and you're going to order a bunch of lumber, they're going to make you sign a form that says you're going to build a doghouse with it, or that you're going to build a shed with it, or you're going to build a treehouse with it. But they won't give you data until you tell them exactly how you're going to use it, which is the greatest barrier to innovation in the industry and has been since the earliest IDX rules were written back in the early 2000s. So we as an industry, and I think some of the more enlightened MLSs are realizing that when Simba knocks on the door, that your first question should be, how can we help you? Not so much, how can we police the hell out of you so that you don't misuse the data? We are so paranoid about misuse of the data that the menu of services on data feeds has held this prescription of use. We're getting away from that, but that is how MLSs can be less modular is, Evan, what are you going to do with the data? Great, here is your feed. And that's what it's been doing. Well, now we need to say, Evan, you're a great guy. Here's a data feed. We hope you build something important. And there's a little tug of war going on there, because it is really important to police the data. You just shouldn't give it to anybody who walks in the door. But our vetting process needs work.
Yeah. The last one on the list here, this was kind of from my perspective. I know other prop tech founders feel this way. And it's not just isolated to the MLS network, but it feels kind of pay to play. It's from the outside looking in, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's experts like you that have been in it, and it's hard to really break into that. What's your perspective on that? As somebody that's inside of this industry and has been in it for so long, you've got prop tech founders saying, hey, this feels like such a burden to get into. I've got to pay people to get in. What's your commentary on that?
Yeah, I think that's the way the world works. I mean, I don't think this is real estate technology specifically. I think every industry you're trying to break into is the exact same way. Everything is based on relationships. I don't know of any aspect of business where being a jerk is going to get you anywhere. and being unconnected and so forth. I think no matter what you want to do, you're going to have to grease some wheels, and pay to play. I think you're right. That's a pretty broad way of saying
harsh way to
you
put
have
it.
to engage.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's cynical, and you've earned that. You've certainly experienced the same things that I've experienced over career. Is you are going to have to go to these conferences. You are going to have to pay a lot of money for a ticket. You are going to have to sit at the lobby bar longer than you want to. You are going to have to, walk the halls and talk the talk and do the dog and pony show ad nauseum. You are going to have to, make friends with people and come out of your comfort zone a little bit in order to, and you're not selling. What you're really doing is you're relating. You're solving problems. You're making inroads. And as we talked about a few minutes ago, the pace of this industry is so freaking slow that you're going to have to create a relationship with someone in January that may not pay dividends until October. You've seen that. You've experienced that. And that's just the way it is. And I wish that I could tell you differently, but you're going to spend a lot of money in this industry before you see any of it.
Yeah. And on like personality level, you mentioned there, you got to get out of your comfort zone. Sarah Fogg and I laugh about this. That's me. I'm an introvert. I go to these events, and that's out of my comfort zone to sit and go to these bars, and I've had to learn from you to do that, and it's been good. But yeah, it's definitely a space where relationships come first, and after that, you grow from there. Last question on the MLS is, what's the biggest threat to MLSs? What do they need to do to protect themselves or evolve? What's the threat?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think there's an outside threat to MLSs. That's going to sound controversial, because how could there not be? I think the MLS has their golden key for longevity is that no one wants to be the data police. Like, nobody wants to do quality control on data. Zillow doesn't want to do this. CoStar maybe they do that on the commercial side, but a lot of commercial databases are absolute murder scenes. But I think MLSs have this core, talent or feature that no one else can duplicate, which is quality data, and policing it and finding agents that put garbage or try to put garbage into a database. Personally, I think the biggest threat to MLSs are each other. So the biggest threat to the 5,000 member MLS is the 10,000 member MLS just, 2 cities over. The biggest threat to a small MLS in a small southern state is a big MLS in a northern state. Because right now, data services are no longer geographic. You can be a Louisiana agent and be a member of Southern California MLS and get all your services from there. And as long as you pay your dues and all that stuff, there's no issue with getting data services from an MLS across boundaries. So that's where the consolidation, which NAR has been a big proponent of for many, many years, is starting to happen naturally as these MLSs eat each other. That's the biggest concern. But I don't think that there's a threat to the biggest. The top 10 MLSs are not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yep.
It's the bottom 100 that should be very afraid.
Yeah. And the transition here, the big mission of this podcast is to help, founders learn about cracking into the space, roadblocks. You immediately, when you saw Simba, there was something there that clicked for you. So when you look at either Simba or companies that you also worked for, what do you look at in a prop tech company that makes you want to work with them? What are some of those what are some of those boxes that you want to see checked from a prop tech company?
Yeah, well, the first thing is authenticity. And that is what you guys are doing is you're approaching a problem with a real solution in a different way. No one's doing what you're doing. You guys are trying to do something good for the industry while also making money. If you're getting into this industry to make money quickly, you're fooling yourself. And I think you could write a book on that. So number one I look for is authenticity. I'm not going to put you in a room with someone that I've known for 20 years who trusts me not to bring them garbage. Yeah. So I'm not going to do that for you unless I believe in you. And so the number one thing is that you're genuine. And the other aspect of that is, like I said, for what you guys are doing, is do something good for the industry. I mean, that's your longevity is going to be determined by how valuable you are. Don't give me another CRM. Don't give me another form provider. Don't give me something that's just another, a new tread on an old tire. Bring value to the industry. And that's the top two things.
Yeah. And what do prop tech companies typically need the most help with? What did you look at us and say, I can really give value here, beyond maybe just the connections, because I think that isn't obvious with you. But when you look at prop tech companies, where are they struggling the most and failing that the industry, not just you, maybe can begin to prop them up and help them?
Yeah. Well, number one is expectations. For people from the outside see a broken industry, and it surely is broken in a lot of ways. But if you think that you're going to benefit just by me getting someone like Sarah Fogg to answer their emails, like a lot of people hire me to cut through the mess, cut through the red tape. Like someone like Sarah or someone like a CEO, name a CEO of any top 10 MLS, their inboxes are flooded with, companies trying to get their attention. And I can like fast pass, and I can put you to the front of the line. But you get one shot with most of these folks like you did. And a lot of them think that if they can just get this person's attention, if I can just get a demo with this person, if I can just get an article in Inman, if I can just do this, if I can just do this, that's the finish line. That's actually the beginning. That's actually when the race begins. And that is the hardest lesson for someone that contacts someone like me and says, my first question, what's your burn? How much time do we have? Because, dude, if it's months, if your answer is a single digit number followed by the word months, forget it.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah.
So again, that's as good as I can say is set your expectations accordingly and know that this is going to be an 18-month at the minimum endeavor.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I'm experiencing that firsthand. It takes a while. Long sales cycles, relationships take a while to build. Trust takes a while to build. That's kind of our foundation. If we gain the trust of not only the MLS members and association executives, but more importantly, the agents with their business, I think we can be successful. So I definitely, from my perspective, advice that I've had looking in hindsight to founders, it's focus on the relationships. Focus on, I think, distribution is the thing to solve in the space. You can have a great product. I think our product is completely differentiated, but the big struggles and challenges we've been having is distribution. And I wish earlier, for one, I wish we met earlier. I wish we met when we were developing the product so we could, there would probably be some things we'd change about the development of our roadmap and our product to match how we would want to go to market in the space. I'm glad we met when we did, but I wish it would have been earlier. So my advice to founders would be to build and strategize distribution while you're also building the product, because those two things are very hand in hand in the real estate space. So that'd be my takeaway.
Well, before you sign off, I want to tell you one thing is what you guys are doing, I think, is a great analog for anybody else who's listening and wants information and advice on how to proceed. You went to market intelligently. You're solving a problem. You found a champion. Like you found someone who believed in what you were doing, and you basically wrote the proposal for that person and said, you finish, you set them up, and they actually wrote the proposal for you. We kind of all did this together. And once you have a champion, there's only about 300 people that run this entire industry. I mean, really, from Corcoran and Compass all the way down to the smallest MLS in the country. And when you get one of them, they all swim in the same social circles, So you're going to gain traction. You're going to gain adoption over time. It's just going to take a little bit. But again, it's like this is an organic growth environment, and you're planting seeds all over the place. You guys are doing a really good job of that, is developing a relationship with a champion who is going to be very vocal about you and sing your praises. And that's how you do it in this business. Yeah.
Well, appreciate the kind words, and right back to you. We wouldn't be where we are without you. We've learned a lot of tough lessons, and you've helped us avoid many of those roadblocks. So appreciate you and all the work you're doing. And prop tech founders, I definitely encourage speaking with Bill. He can get you connected. So appreciate everybody.
Appreciate it, man. It's been a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun.
Yeah. We got a long way to go. So for those founders listening, hopefully you got a lot of good takeaways from MLS execs and association execs. The goal here is to build empathy between the two parties and have these open conversations about how each can grow together. So appreciate the time, Bill. Thanks for joining.
Of course. Thanks, Ed. See you.